they're in the meeting so they can hear us. We'll get started. This is the Development Review Board for Burlington, July 7th. And I guess we have, it's a Zoom meeting and we have participants here. Looks like we have 30 attendees and we have the staff and the board here. A few things that we started to do last time, just to try to learn how to do this as a Zoom meeting, that Scott is going to help monitor participants and who's speaking and give me a cue as to who's around, because I can't always see everybody. We're going to ask the board members when they speak, because some people are on the phone, is to identify themselves at least once during the meeting. And when we do votes, we're going to do votes by a roll call, again, just because people can't always see who's speaking. And that the same thing with the public, that when the applicant and the public are here, we're going to ask them to identify themselves by name before they speak. And when we'll swear everybody in, we'll do it in mass, but again, we're going to verify that they've been sworn in when they speak. Okay, I guess that is it.
I had a couple items just to pipe in, Brad, if I may.
Sure.
So you mentioned identify yourself. So we don't have a sign-in sheet. So when folks identify themselves, and this will be important for notice for decisions, you can note your address. That would be helpful. If you don't want to note your address, send me an email with your name and address, and we'll compile it that way. My email is just my first initial last name, so sgustin@burlingtonvt.gov. I think I have most of your information anyhow, but in the event I don't, that'll be important. As for format, typically this will go with the applicants giving their presentation. The board will have question and answer. Then we'll get into public comment. We've talked about specifics for the Burton one, but I'll note that generally we'll use the raise hand function when we get to public comment. So if you're on the phone, that's by pressing *9, and I'll see a hand raised for you, and we'll let you speak. If you're on the Zoom meeting, you'll have a raise hand button. So you press that, and we'll recognize you for speaking. Please don't use the chat function. That complicates the public record. That's it, Brad.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, so the first item is our agenda. I don't think we have any changes to the agenda.
No.
Okay. No. Communications. There were quite a few things that came in today that I believe you posted.
I posted everything except for a couple of last minute emails that had come in.
And they'll be part of the record when we get to those.
Yep.
Okay. Minutes. Do we have minutes? I don't.
No, we have minutes. We need to figure out a good way to include it in your packet, but not for tonight.
Okay. So no minutes. Okay. Well, as disappointing as that is, we'll move on. So the first consent agenda item is 44 Lakeside Avenue to demolish an existing office building, replace it with a new 4-story office building. Is the applicant here?
So the applicant is here. John Callow, I'll enable him to speak.
Okay.
Brad, Jeff Hand, I am recused from this matter, so I'm just going to turn off my video and mic.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
As a correction, if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
The applicant revised the application. It is to rebuild a 3-story building,
Oh,
and the staff report reflects that.
that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll ask the applicant, John Callow. I don't see. Oh, there you are. I don't see you, but I know you're there. Are you okay with this being on a consent agenda?
Yes.
And you're okay with staff's recommendations for approval?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Is there anybody on the board who objects to treating this as a consent agenda item? No. Okay. And is there anybody in the public who's who needs to address this, who wants to speak on this item? I'm not seeing anybody. Scott, are you?
No one's raised their hand.
Okay. So then can I have a motion from somebody on the board? Identify yourself when you make the motion, actually.
I'll do the motion. It's Brooks MacArthur on 20-0820 CA. I move that we approve the application, adopt staff findings and recommendations.
Is there a second? Ravi?
I'll second that.
Ravi. Thank you, Ravi. Any discussion? All in favor? I'm just going to do by roll call. AJ?
Approve.
Brooks?
Aye.
Ravi?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
And Keenan?
Aye.
And I go aye. So it's approved. Okay, John, it's approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. It's a nice project. We didn't get to show it to everybody out there, but it's a nice project on the lake. Through your reasons for denial?
Yeah, I will. The applicant applied for an after the fact deck. He had according to aerial images backdated as far back as 2000, 2003, and 2013. We can make out a patio that ran the back of the house, the lakeside of the house. And the application was to replace that patio with a new deck. The new deck was on a different footprint. And the applicant mentioned that he had removed the patio in 2017 and 2018, which according to the non-conforming structures renders it void as acceptable as a existing use. After 12 months of discontinued use, that a non-conforming use loses its non-conformity or existing status. So the ability to replace that in that footprint basically goes away. Per his conversation, he did mention that he removed the patio that he was replacing in 2017 and 2018, and he's seeking the after the fact permit to allow for the already existing new deck. The deck does encroach. It appears to encroach a little bit further than the previous patio did into the lakefront setback. And lakefront setbacks are generally, if they don't meet the 75-foot setback from the lakeshore, it is an average of the neighboring principal structures on neighboring properties, to which neither the previous patio nor the new patio conforms with. So basically, the gist is the previous patio was removed. It lost its non-conforming status. He built a new deck in its stead, and normally that would be unpermitted because it goes into that lakefront setback.
And Ryan, I'll just ask you a question. Does impervious surface terrace or stonework, does that come under the same criteria as a deck does, which is raised? Yep. It does? Okay. So any questions for Ryan from the board? No. So Gordon, somebody want to say something? No. Okay. Gordon, so you hear the presentation. This is what basically is in the staff report, and you want to make your appeal?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So he's accurate in the fact that I did not get a permit. The thing that I want to clarify is that there was an existing patio along the full length of the back of the house that was by definition, I guess, water pebbles that you can see in the aerial video or aerial photos. Though grainy, you can still see where they are through the years. Now, the house was not abandoned. It was unlived in for a couple of years before I purchased. And when I remodeled back there, I didn't actually remove the patio that existed. It was so overgrown that I basically had to dig it up and retrieve the pebbles that were under it. But those are basically left there. And then I built a deck, which is a floating deck, an inch or two off the ground over the top of it. Now, if you look at the photos, the aerial photos, you'll see that it is across the whole length of the back of the house in 2003, 2013 or 14. And then you'll see where I built a deck over the top of it. So to clarify, Ryan, and this is something I didn't understand when we were talking through emails, the words I was using correctly, because I didn't actually remove the existing deck. I just didn't get a permit when I built over it, and I had to dig it up to retreat, to remove all of the green and the vegetation that I didn't want growing under the deck to begin with. The deck that I had built, as you'll see from the videos, yes, it is larger in length from the existing, but the existing was at least 8 feet from the house. And the other thing is that it was a house that was unlived in for years. I'm just trying to make it livable. I sent new pictures to Ryan, which he may have distributed. The deck that I built is not intrusive. It fits very well with the environment. It meets right to the point where the previous gardens were that had to be reconditioned, and it's the whole house, I think, is actually within 75 feet of high water. And of course, high water right now means add another half an acre. I guess the point being is that I'm appealing because it fits. It's what was needed, and I'm willing to work with you guys with regards to the outcome, as long as it seems reasonable.
When you say pebbles, are you talking about the flagstones?
No, there's flagstones that are behind the garage on the west side. There's visibly a white space behind the house, all along the back side of the house, that was the previous pebbles that are basically water pebbles, and that was the patio. And when I laid this deck over the top of that, I cleaned the area by digging up those pebbles and pulling out all the vegetation, because of course I didn't want that growing up under the deck. So I didn't remove the deck, the existing patio. I just had to recondition it, and that is the existing patio prior to 2017 was it's basically the under layer of protection as I put over a vegetation blocker and things like that before the deck came on. So technically I didn't remove the existing. I don't know if that's going to make a big difference. Hopefully, I know you guys obviously aren't able to visibly come out here and look at it, but I'm asking for obviously an appeal on this situation. So thank you for your time.
So I just want to try to understand what I'm looking at with this photograph. I see your new deck, which is gray with the chairs on it, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
there's flagstones or something going up to the deck, right? In the ground. There's
existing.
stones.
Did not remove that. That was existing already.
And those stones, where the stones and the deck is now, where the deck is, used to be this gravel bed there or something like that, you're saying? Pebbles. Is that right? Gordon?
I can answer.
Pardon? Can you hear me? You're breaking up there.
Yeah.
I'm still here. Yep.
Okay, so where the stones end at the beginning of your current deck, is that where the beginning of the gravel was? We're having trouble hearing Gordon at the moment.
Brad, if I may butt in to respond, he did send me those photos today, which were posted online for your viewing. Showing the old patio, or the gravel walkway essentially on the lakeside.
Yeah.
And that does kind of match with the aerial photos of previous years.
Yeah.
So, maybe that wouldn't be determined as having been removed. But I'd just say the code would allow for that patio's replacement with with a deck maybe a few inches off the ground, some sort of improvement. But the footprint would essentially have to stay the same per the code. Any expansion of that footprint of an existing non-conforming gravel patio wouldn't necessarily be allowed.
And do we know if this footprint is bigger than the gravel footprint?
Unless the applicant can butt in, it appears to be in a different footprint.
Okay.
And slightly larger in that area.
Okay.
I don't know the overall footprint, if square footage, if you wanted to compare it that way, which wouldn't necessarily go with the code, but I don't know what the give and take or the ratio of that would be.
I'm going to assume that Gordon will find his way back into the meeting, hopefully. Let me ask Dave Jeanette, who is here. Dave, are you a neighbor or?
Yeah, I'm Gordy's real estate agent.
Ah.
I'm marketing the home.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you have any comment or understanding of what was there and what is there?
Yes, I mean, according to what Gordy had mentioned, it seems as though the deck does go towards the lake a little bit further than the original stone pebbles did. But the stone pebbles also went, I don't have that photo you're looking at, but I'm assuming from what Gordy was saying, they went across the whole back of the house.
Yeah.
So that, as Ryan was mentioning, if you look at the overall square footage, probably what the deck is right now might not be more, but I understand that doesn't mean the deck. But it just would be an awful hardship, of course, if this was, I think if the appeal is denied is one thing, but if he's not allowed to have anything in that area on the lakefront home on Apple Tree Point, it would be worst case. We're hoping that at least what was there or close to it can be reused as it was, so that people can sit in the back of their house and have some kind of footing other than lawn to sit on. I think that's the ultimate goal. So I'm not sure if in this meeting, if appealing the permit, if the appeal is denied, does that automatically mean that you have no leeway at this point to allow something else? You have to go through a whole nother hearing? Or are you able to deny the appeal and also grant potentially to go back to what he had?
I think that's going to be determined by the conversation we have in our deliberative.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
I see Gordon is back on. Is that true? Are you there, Gordon?
I am.
Ah, we lost you there.
Yeah.
And we were talking to Dave a minute ago, Jeanette. And so the question that we had for you was the lakeside edge of that wood deck. It does seem that deck protrudes past where the gravel was before. Is that true?
It does, a few feet past.
Okay.
But it does not go all the way along the back of the house as the previous pebble path went.
I know. Our dilemma is that so you've got less square footage, but you've got more encroachment.
I asked Ryan about the encroachment. I'm looking at the aerial photo from 2004.
Now, who's this speaking?
Sorry, this is Jeff.
Okay, Jeff, thank you.
Question. It looks like that lines up with the photo we got where the flat or the path had some sort of a walkway down to the beach, sort of a T. When we're thinking about the encroachment area, is it sort of furthest encroachment and that establishes a line across that area, or does it need to be the exact same footprint as the prior encroachment? So in other words, could he go out the edge of that off the patio, or does it need to be lined up narrower prior patio?
Because it's on the old patio is existing non-conforming, and it would have to maintain the same footprint.
Okay. And it's what Gordon saying is beyond that area for at least the portion he's built is beyond the edge of the prior.
It is to the west, it looks like, more directly behind the garage. It butts out more directly behind the garage.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board for the applicant or for the real estate agent? Okay. I think we have, Gordon, I think we have an understanding of the situation that.
Keenan has a question.
Oh, who does? Oh, Keenan, go ahead. I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, no problem. This is just a quick question about, so I just wanted to, in the denial letter, it talks about how the construction was conducted in 2 phases, first in 2017, and then in 2018. How come you didn't apply for the permit? Why did you wait to apply for the permit instead of just applying back in 2017?
I just didn't apply for the permit. And I recognize that's not the way things are supposed to roll, but I didn't apply for the permit. I mean, I wish I had a better answer, but I didn't.
Thank you. That's a fair answer.
Appreciate the candor.
Okay. I do think we sort of understand what's happening and what the situation is. Right? I think with that, we will close this public hearing. Again, I don't know if we sort of have a long agenda tonight. We'll see if we deliberate tonight or another day. I'll let you know. Thank you.
When will an answer be provided?
Well, we have to deliberate. And what I just said, I don't know if we're going to deliberate tonight or at our beginning of our next meeting. We'll figure that out. As soon as we deliberate, then you get an answer.
Are these monthly?
They're every other week.
Oh,
Twice
okay.
a month, I should say. Twice.
I see. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next agenda item is 66 North Avenue, Sarah Holbrook Community Center, appeal for administrative denial for proposed new sign. I see that the applicant is here somewhere. And either Scott or Ryan will.
It's my project. It's under Duncan Wisniewski.
Yeah, I see. I'll allow, assume that's Bob Duncan.
Yes, hi.
Hi, Bob.
Is there anyone else, Bob?
I think there might be some other board members and staff members from Sarah Holbrook online here, but do you have Larry Kupferman or Bruce Chapman or Chip Spillane?
Well, if anyone else wants to talk, well, how do you want to do this, Brad? Do you want to let Bob speak and then we'll ask for others who want to speak?
I guess we could start with that, and then
Okay.
make sure Bob in, and then if anybody else is going to speak, we'll have them get sworn in at that point. Okay, you okay with that, Bob?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll swear you in. Do you swear to tell the whole truth under pain and penalty of perjury?
I do.
Okay, so it's basic issue of the type of sign and where it is on the building. I'll let you make your case here.
Would you like to have Ryan go through his same procedure you did earlier, or do you want me to respond? Or
well, I guess that's Bob. You are right. I should have Ryan go through his. You know, it seemed pretty basic in terms of his response, but why don't you do that, Ryan? Thank you, Bob.
Okay. So the Sarah Holbrook remodel was permitted by the DRB back in 2018, I believe. Among that, they did show on the elevation plans a canopy sign on the front of the building. And at that time, there was a condition placed on that zoning permit, conditional use permit, that they obtain their sign permit because those are issued separately and reviewed separately. Now, in the time between then and now, the sign ordinance has changed, and specifically to awning/canopy signs in the RM zoning districts, they are specifically prohibited. In the RM zone, also the RL zone, the RH zone, the high density, does in fact allow them, but unfortunately the property is zoned RM where it is specifically prohibited. That's the basis of denial. There are other options as noted in the staff report for signage that is allowable on the property.
Okay. And the canopy is not in question, right?
Correct. That's all part of the approved plan of 2018.
Okay, Bob.
Hey,
Can I
so
ask Ryan a question before we go to Bob? This is
Okay.
Jeff again.
That's Jeff.
Ryan, we approved the architectural component of this sign as a part of the building. The canopy is already, in my mind, technically approved. We saw it, we approved it as a design feature of the building. What I understand them to be applying for now is to put the letters on that architectural feature that identifies the building.
That's correct.
How is that, if the feature of the building has already been approved, how can we deny them putting just the letters on that feature?
It's a good question. I would speculate that it was an architectural feature. You know, maybe it covers the entrance as far as what bad weather cover protection from the entrance. Signage specifically is just reviewed underneath a different format as far as administrative review. As far as my practice with the city has been, it's always been done administratively unless it's like a master sign plan for property.
But this isn't like I mean, when I saw awning, I was expecting, a new feature that is attached to the building as part of the sign plan and is kind of clearly a new thing. What I'm seeing though is really just letters on part of the building we've already approved. And I guess that's the way I'm looking at it.
I hear that, that view for sure. It is a part of the approved building. As best I can say is that the signage would be reviewed separately. The lettering placed on the canopy itself. That's where the sign code comes in and is reviewed separately.
Okay.
If I may, so sure, the canopy was part of the design and that was included in the approval. But as Ryan's pointing out, the practice is that the actual signage, placement, what it says, how big it is, lighting, it's pretty much always handled separately. So we're not saying that the awning itself is a problem. We're simply saying that the sign is on top of the awning. Or the awning signage in this case is what's a problem.
But
and Ryan also pointed out the change in the applicable sign code between then and now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm struggling with is the intent, as I read it, of that section of the ordinance is to prohibit the overhanging nature of these kinds of awnings. It's not about where the letters are placed. It's about the physical feature of an awning. And that's already part of this building. So the thing the ordinance is trying to prohibit, we've already approved as part of the design. It seems like the application therefore would just be as to whether the lettering as proposed or lighting or other aspects that are new would be inconsistent with an ordinance.
I have a question for staff. In the decision issued, is there any reference to signage at any point?
With the original approval in 2018?
Yeah.
Yeah, condition 18, condition 18 said you needed to apply separately for a sign permit, okay? In the meat of the staff report, in the findings, I don't recall there normally wouldn't be any reference to signage, whether it's approved or not, or it fits the criteria of the sign ordinance at that time. That's generally not included. I could probably go back and find that and confirm. But yeah, there is the condition 18 that does require a separate sign permit.
So Robbie, in the findings, there's boilerplate language under Article 6, the design standards. There might be a notation that they're showing signage location, but that a separate permit's required and that it's not included in the DRB's decision.
Okay, thanks.
Even though I tend to agree with Jeff's view that the signage was actually part of the presentation of the original building, at least lettering was, and it's hard to look at now. But anyways, I think it's probably, Bob, do you want to, now that everybody's making your case, do you want to make it?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Number one, I just want to say that I appreciate Ryan's response, because I think that from a technical review of the language of the ordinance, I find it's difficult to find fault with or any error in what his analysis is based on purely that wording. I think what we would like you to consider here is that, yes, in fact, this is an RM district. When we applied for the permit, we actually showed the sign that we intended to get a permit for. We knew we had to get a separate permit for it, but at that time, that sign was allowable in this district. And I'm hesitant to use this argument with so many attorneys on the board, but frankly, there's some ignorance of the change in the law. I didn't realize the law changed. We could have applied for this sign permit before we started construction. I was not aware of the change. So when we came to apply, we were applying for something that we thought would automatically be approved because it would have been approved and allowed under the original submission. And in fact, the original submission showed a sign on the drawings. So even though I know a separate sign permit is required, we thought we were going, creating and providing an even more thorough presentation by showing the sign that we intended to get a permit for. And had someone said, well, you know, there's some talk about changing the ordinance, we'd have hopped on that right away. And I know that, you know, I'm an architect, I work in Burlington, I should be aware of changes to the ordinance. I was not aware of that. So we did apply for original design, included a sign that would have been approved at that time. So to retroactively apply a change in the zoning ordinance to a sign design that was ostensibly approved in its submission. I know technically it wasn't, but it was certainly shown to you what we intended to apply for. So I think that should have some merit, and I think in your ability to grant an appeal, you can take that into consideration, even though it may not be specifically allowed in this district. The other thing that I want to point out, and I pointed out in my appeal originally, is that yes, this is an RM district, and as we've learned, this particular sign is not allowed in an RM district. However, it's hard to understand that this is an RM district. When you look at the properties across the street, down the street, around the corner, the old North Ender pub abuts this property from North Street to the back corner of our property. Opportunities Credit Union's on the corner, Brian Sunoco's on the corner, Cots is on the corner, the police station's on another corner, Commodore Point is across the street. And in fact, the density of the remaining RM properties that are there are essentially RH density. If you look at your ordinance carefully, and as I think some of you already know, it's virtually impossible to build anything that's RH in the city. And it's essentially impossible to build anything under your ordinance in the RM district and comply with all the criteria of height, lot coverage, and so on. So in essence, even though that district is zoned RM, it's essentially RH because of the density, the size of the properties, the amount of lot coverage it each has. So this area, even though technically it is RM, essentially feels RH, and it's bordered by NMU. So we have a feeling here in terms of the context of the area that is much different than what would be a truly RM district. So we think that what we're proposing is consistent with the building design, consistent with the original application, consistent with much of what happens around it, and therefore should be allowed. Furthermore, item number 4 in Ryan's response, he's correct. The ordinance does allow for a freestanding sign. You could do something up to 20 square feet. The reality is, and I think you probably have the building elevation, and if you need me to screen share, I can show you a site plan, but there's essentially no practical place to put a 20 square foot freestanding sign in this design that wouldn't obstruct the view for pedestrians or vehicles that are passing the site. So if you'd like me to share that, I could. If you're familiar with the site or if you've driven by and understand that as you pull into the site, there's a drop-off area, there's entrance to the parking structure, there's a pedestrian waiting, arrival, departure area. All of those things conflict with the idea of a freestanding sign. 20 square feet is 4 by 5. That is actually in conflict with with the idea that we put a fence on the property and we can't have a fence that you can't see through within 25 feet of the front of the property. And yet the ordinance says we can put a sign in there that's opaque and 20 square feet that would be blocking visibility for the abutting neighbor, for drivers on the street, for pedestrians and bicyclists and so on. And it just doesn't really make sense. So we think that what we're providing is discreet, it's identifiable, it doesn't distract from pedestrians, from vehicular traffic. It doesn't make it difficult to move in and out of the site. So all those reasons, including others that I mentioned earlier, I think give you opportunity to think about and consider granting this appeal of the denial. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Any questions for the applicant?
This is Jeff. I just have a factual question for Bob. Bob, we do have an elevation as part of the application or the appeal materials, and I'm looking at that sort of concrete gray stripe that runs along the whole front of the building.
Yes.
Does that whole strip come out from the facade of the building?
Yes.
Or at the same distance then as where you're proposing to put the lettering?
Yes, actually, where the lettering is on that drawing that you're looking at, you see where on the west elevation, the smaller part of the drawing on the bottom of the page, it says proposed sign location on face of entry canopy. Once again, I could pull up a site plan for you, but that particular part of that canopy actually cranks at an angle and comes out a little bit further from the rest of the canopy. The majority of the canopy, if you look at that drawing, once again, you see that where it points to proposed sign location on face of entry canopy. To the right of that white arrow and in line with that masonry pier, there's a little vertical line in the canopy. You see that? From there to the south, it projects approximately 5 feet from the face of the building.
Okay.
From that line to the left or to the north, it projects from 5 feet at the line and it comes out to more like 9 feet at the front corner.
Okay.
So it does project a little bit further out there.
Okay.
That was all part of the original approval.
Got it. That's what I wanted to ask. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Sure. Would it be helpful for me to show the site plan so you get a sense of where the conflicts might be for a freestanding sign?
I think it's pretty obvious how tight that property is. I think we had that with the just getting cars in and out of it.
Yep.
Made the application. And I have to say, all the other signs, which are the wall sign and window sign, and the site sign, which are all approved in this district, seem to be more offensive or more disruptive, I would say, than what you've proposed.
I would agree with that.
It's amazing to me that a wall sign is allowed, and I'm trying to understand the difference between this canopy, which exists, and the surface of this canopy, and the adjacent wall. That technically, it's not really a wall, but it's sort of a vertical surface, which is what a wall is. But that's all conversations for deliberative as much as anything. Are there other questions that the board has, either for the applicant or for the staff? No. And I know there are other people that, Bob, you thought might want to comment. I mean, we know Sarah Holbrook is a good community member. We understand all that. This is an issue about the sign and the ordinance.
Yep.
And how we're going to rule it. So I don't know if anybody else feels the need to speak at that point.
Brad, I see a hand raised in the attendees.
47 Sen.
Yep.
Do we know who that is?
Oh, and just went down.
Oh, it just went down.
That person is one of the board members of Sarah Holbrook.
Okay.
Are they wanting to speak, or are they?
I don't know.
Okay, we don't see a hand up anywhere. I think that we have the information that we need to discuss among the board members to deliberate on this.
Great. So, thank you for your time and your consideration. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I will close the public hearing. Thank you. Okay, next item is 266 Queen City Park Road. I'm gonna just mention that this is a fairly large application with apparently a fair amount of interest in it, a lot of moving parts to it. And it is likely that we won't go through the entire application tonight, that we will probably continue this hearing. We're going to see what we can do, but we'd like to not go past 7:30 with the meeting. Keenan, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking like it's just kind of throwing this out here as far as organization goes. I don't know how you want to handle this, but it seems like there's sort of the South Burlington Council kind of made a good overlay of the issues, and maybe we can take like the issues as they're sort of laid out, as in, you know, there's like a big noise issue, we've got a traffic issue, parking issue, safety issue, and then you know, the South Burlington City Council had an issue with Red Rocks, but you know, sort of like environmental issue.
I think the issue is going to be that we want to get the presentation from the applicant and hear how they're going to address certain points. There's a lot of public that want to speak, and it may be that we hear from the applicant and certain technical things, and then how much of the public we get through tonight is going to be the question.
Yeah, Brad, do you want to go over what we talked about timing?
Yes, so we're also, Jeff.
Brad, I'm recused from this, so I'm actually going to sign off. I will give Scott my cell phone. If for some reason you deliberate on the other matters tonight, I'll just ask that he texts me so I can try to join back in.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
I wanted to note that in terms of the public comments, because there are so many people who I think are going to participate in this one, we've done this before, that we're going to limit the time to each public comment to 3 minutes. And there was some discussion. I think there's at least one person that's representing a group of citizens, and we're still going to limit that person to 5 minutes, even if they're representing a group of citizens.
And let me be clear, part of the reason for doing this is, you know, I think Brad underplayed it. This is going to take more than one meeting. And I believe most likely this will be continued. And anybody who has comments, public comments, because we're doing this over Zoom, because it's so unwieldy, should absolutely submit any further or additional comments to staff in the interim. I can tell you, I've read every one that's been submitted so far. I'm sure all the other board members have read them as well. We want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to participate, but we have to manage it over Zoom in a way that's digestible. It's not very easy to take on a big project with a lot of public comment over video chat functions. So bear with us and expect that this will go into another meeting. I think Brad was being a little nicer than maybe I would be.
Thank you, Jay. So I agree. How we get organized, I think we're gonna have to see how this goes. I think Keenan's suggestion is good. There's a lot of specific issues, but I think at this point, the applicant is here, and I'm just thinking about swearing people in. Can you admit to the hearing the applicant at this point, Scott?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Brad, I have the list of applicants that I can enable to speak and present.
Yeah.
And once everybody's up, you can swear in, or you can swear in while I'm processing that.
I think we'll start with the applicant and swear them in, and then we'll see how that goes, and then see when we get to the public comment period. And I do apologize to the public that we have to do this a little bit blind, since we can't really see who's raising the hand and who's ready to participate. But the applicant, who is the applicant team at this point? Can somebody introduce them?
Yeah, so this is Justin Worthley, Senior Vice President at Burton, and joining me today is John Kahlo, who's our project manager, Alex Crothers and Mark Balderston, both from Higher Ground, Jen Conley from VHB, and Eddie Duncan from RSG. We're also represented by Brian Dunkiel, who's not scheduled as part of our presentation, but maybe jumping in at later to respond to DRB questions.
Okay.
I have
So
a
let me
couple
start-
more to fish out, Brad.
Pardon?
I have a couple more applicants to fish out, promote.
I see Brian.
I think that's it now. I think we have all the applicants enabled.
We do. Thanks.
Okay. And I would say that, so the only person that's not enabled right now is that might speak is Brian. Is that right? Brian Dunkiel?
Correct.
So I'm going to ask the applicant team to swear themselves in and do you swear to tell the whole truth under pain and penalty of perjury. You're supposed to
Yes.
raise
I do.
your right hand. I can actually see some of you.
I do.
and
Yes.
You do. So
I do.
great. So as beautiful or wonderful as the building may or may not be, I think that the issues on this seem to center mostly on traffic and noise. And maybe you may want to start with an overall presentation, but we want to get to that focus at some point. And
Sure. And that's why
you're making the presentation.
I am. Yes. So we have some slides to go through. So I think I can share that screen.
Scott, are you controlling this, or is this?
I've enabled the Burton team to share.
Okay, I can see it.
You can see Burton Hub Performing Arts Center CU application.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what we have prepared to cover. I'm going to do a little intro and overview. Then I'm going to hand it over to Alex and Mark to give a bit of a comment about the Performing Arts Center operations. We've been working very closely, particularly around the operational management plan. And then we'll address the conditional use criteria. I'm going to address 3 of them at a very high level. And then we have Eddie and Jen who will get into the details of noise and traffic. And then we'll wrap up with John and I will address comments that have been submitted back to us by staff, CRZ, and the City of South Burlington. So intro and overview. I won't linger here, but some facts about Burton, I guess, that I'd call out here is we've been on what was Industrial Parkway, now Queen City Park Road, since 1992, where we moved into the 180 building. We moved into the 266 building in 2007. That's the focus of this application, is in the 266 building. Some other fun facts and locations about Burton included on the slide, but I'll keep moving. This is a map, an image of our location. So to orient you, this is, north is vertical, or is to the top, south is to the bottom. The area highlighted in green is the delineation of the Enterprise Light Manufacturing Zoning District, of which we are a part, which extends through much of the south end. The red dash line here is the South Burlington city boundary. And then highlighted in yellow with the numbers 180 and 266 are the 2 Burton properties. So clearly within the ELM zoning district, which we think is a very relevant point for this application. And it's a longstanding industrial location. Actually, the 266 building was the first of all the existing industrial buildings in this little neighborhood. The building, first piece of it anyway, went up in 1958. So long established area. Zooming in with a little bit more detail here, a few things I'd point out. On the image on the right-hand side, the blue rectangle is the space that we're talking about. That's the subject of this application. There is no change to the footprint of the building outside. We would merely be repurposing interior space that's existing for this use. The space itself is a really important reason why we're sitting here. It's a clear span, 34-foot ceiling industrial area. And that's the primary reason why this whole concept exists, because it works really well as a performing arts venue space, or essentially as right now, a pretty raw box that would be fitted up for a performing arts center space. There are very, very, very few existing spaces like that in the state of Vermont. And I would let the higher ground crew talk more about that, as they've been seeking a possible new location for a long time. Also, it just reinforced the fact that this is a existing building footprint that we're able to repurpose is a really important part of this application, because it keeps the cost reasonable. And again, I won't speak for higher ground, but I think it would be very difficult for them to be able to purpose build a facility given the cost of new construction. And then the last point I'd make here is the areas shaded in gray are either existing or planned surface parking areas. It's another highly attractive part of this project, is that we would be able to have access in nighttime hours when the Performing Arts Center would be active to ample parking, surface parking. So we do have another permit application that's been approved by the DRB to make some improvements to our parking lot and stormwater system. So that redesign is what's shown here in the current shading. So the hub, I know, we've been talking about this. There's been media reports about it. Our overall vision for the hub is a multi-purpose location. On this page here, the items listed in green are existing. The items in italics would be added. And really, we're only here today to talk about higher ground, which would be the Performing Arts Center. So really, the only thing that we have in front of the DRB today is the conditional use application for the Performing Arts Center use, which would be operated by higher ground.
Justin, I'm sorry, I just want to interrupt. That includes the restaurant that you just listed?
Correct. So we've been working really hard at this. I guess is the main thing I want to emphasize here.
AJ, could you repeat that question again? Does it include the?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure when he was saying that it included the restaurant spaces. I mean, can you go back a slide, Justin?
It's not, the restaurant or cafe is not part of any component of this application that we've submitted right now. So that would be a future piece.
So no food service is part of this application?
Correct. So there is going to be within the space, if you've ever been to higher ground, there is a bar. They do serve alcohol within the space. But what Justin is mentioning is something that would be outside and independent of the performing arts space.
It's a concept only right now. We don't have a design. We're not prepared to submit it, any further progress on that cafe concept right now.
Because I will have to be clear on that, because if I look at the plan submitted, there's food court, servery, kitchen, freezer, cooler. So I just want to be clear.
Yeah, it's really the only place in the application that shows up in that drawing. It's really a placeholder concept right now.
In the traffic report.
Yeah, there are some references to it in the traffic report. Good point. Keep going.
Please.
So our work on this goes back over 2 years. We had a lot of public engagement leading up to City Council vote on zoning changes about a year ago, a little more than a year ago. This slide captures work we've done through that process and beyond. We've been to the touch base with the Ward 5 NPA most recently a few weeks ago. We've been working very closely with departments across Burlington and South Burlington. We know this is on the radar for the South Burlington, City of South Burlington as well. We had a meeting as recently as June 30th with 2 members of the City Council and the head of planning and city manager. We'll touch on that later. And we've been talking extensively with representatives from the Citizens for Responsible Zoning group. We've had in-person or Zoom meetings. You can see the dates listed here. So sharing our plans, hearing their questions and concerns, building as many of those things as possible into the scope of our application that's presented here today. and that our intent is certainly to keep that dialogue open and continuing. So from here, we'll talk a little bit. I'm going to hand it over to Alex and Mark in a second. But as I mentioned, really this Performing Arts Center concept really all starts with a space that we have, high ceilings, open span. It's not new construction or footprint expansion. The idea with a Performing Arts Center is that it would be configurable for a range of events in terms of size. And actually, based on their business plan, Higher Ground expects relatively few full capacity shows. We also see this as a vibrant community resource, so not simply a concert venue for ticketed events, but also a place that can be used for public events, community events, rented for private space. We actually do that pretty regularly right now. One of the things we have in that 266 building is a large showroom for our wholesale dealers. And we've hosted many city meetings, other private groups coming in. So we would expect that to be at a much actually better level. And then, in terms of representing Burton, the reason, a linchpin reason why this makes sense to us is that we have a partner in Higher Ground with 22 years of experience on Williston Road, but at many, many other venues. I don't know how aware the board is about this, but they operate, they stood up the operation out at the fairgrounds right now. They operate concerts at the waterfront, at Shelburne Museum. Their ownership is involved in concert venue operations throughout the country. So they have significant experience with running and managing great events. So that's a key reason why, we're not looking at a startup partner or somebody who has to climb a learning curve. They come in as very experienced people. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex Crothers, who's the founder and one of the co-owners of Higher Ground. And I'm going to actually turn off the screen sharing because I think you just get the pleasure of seeing Alex's face for this.
All right. Thanks, Justin. My name's Alex Crothers. I started Higher Ground 22 years ago in Winooski, where for 6 years we enjoyed a harmonious and collaborative relationship with the city and the surrounding neighborhoods there. Then in 2004, we were forced to relocate the venue to our current site on Williston Road. And for the last 16 years, we've had the same relationship with the city of South Burlington. For the last probably 6 years, we've been endeavoring to look for a new location for Higher Ground. And it's now time for us to move once again. We expect to have the same collaborative, productive relationship with the city of Burlington and the surrounding communities that we did in South Burlington. We're in the music and live events business, which is really to say we're in the safety and logistics business. That's what drives decisions. We have an experienced and dedicated team that has established a management plan for this facility. We have extensive experience producing and managing events. Our company is known for producing high quality, safe events throughout the Northeast and throughout the country. And we're always welcome back whenever we produce an event. As one case in point, we produced a 25,000 person festival at a contemporary art museum filled with priceless art in the middle of downtown North Adams, Mass. The town was cautious at first, but now rolls out the red carpet. The pandemic has crippled the performing arts sector. We were the first to close and will be the last to reopen. However, we're determined to bounce back with new vitality to serve our community for many years to come. Burlington and Vermont in general has struggled to retain young people within the state. Arts and entertainment play a critical role in solving that challenge. We look forward to being safe, responsible operators of a stunning new performing arts space within the Burton Hub project that will bring some vitality to a manufacturing facility that's long past its prime. And now I'm going to hand it over to Mark, our GM, who's going to talk a little bit about our operational plan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Balderston, and I'm the GM of Higher Ground. Not sure if I'm required to do this, but I am a Burlington resident, 43 Pitkin Street, and I also support the project as a citizen. Higher Ground has 22 years of experience with designing and executing event-specific operational plans, and we outlined our proposed method of crowd and event management in the new facility in a 2-page document included in the application entitled Burton Hub Performing Arts Center Draft Operational Management Plan, submitted as a part of that application. As I said, the document outlines event management approach an event management approach, which draws from techniques used in our existing Williston Road location, as Justin said, but also techniques honed at Higher Ground Presents events managed by our staff in Vermont and beyond, around the country, even internationally. This document outlines our proposed approach with respect to parking and traffic management, coordination with law enforcement, crowd supervision, alcohol enforcement, and management of the ingress and egress processes according to crowd size. We reviewed this written plan, draft plan, with BPD, with the Burlington Police Department, while meeting with Deputy Chief John Murad to discuss it in April via Zoom. And following that meeting, he issued a letter of support for the plan in which he stated, and I quote here, "Owing to the clarity of and assurances in the operational management plan, as well as the project lead's demonstrated history of responsible management and strong relationships with the South Burlington Police Department, the BPD offers its unconditional support of Burton's conditional use application." I'd also add that we have an excellent track record with the State Department of Liquor and Lottery, Division of Liquor Control, and we've designed the plan in question with our high liquor liability standards in mind. Many of those same techniques designed to contain alcohol within a closed system and prevent over-intoxication will also serve to protect the surrounding neighborhoods from disturbance of any kind. Simply put, this is what we do at Higher Ground. We design and build concert operations plans and execute them to the satisfaction of the communities in which they take place. We sit before the DRB today, but have also been engaging in ongoing dialogue with the CRZ group and aim to continue those discussions in order to ensure that stakeholders are satisfied and impacts are minimized. We're committed to being good neighbors and stewards of the arts in our community, and will continue to do so by facilitating well-managed concerts and community events in the proposed Performing Arts Center. Thanks for your time and for listening, and I'm going to turn it back over to Justin.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Alex. I'm going to turn my screen share back on here. Okay, so we're going to...
If the board members have any questions so far, you can raise your hand and we can address that. Otherwise, we'll just keep going with the presentation.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the materials and I didn't see Deputy Chief Murad's letter in there. I saw Chief Morrison's letter that conditioned the approval, or the support, I should say.
There are two letters. There was an initial letter from Chief Morrison and then a follow-up letter from Deputy Chief Murad. I believe it's in the same attachment.
I think that was posted, Brooks. I'll double check, but I know it's there.
Okay. I just see that.
This is Brian Dunkel. It's worth adding that the first letter occurred prior to the operational management plan being prepared.
Right.
The second one considered the application with the operational management plan included.
Okay. Thank you.
It is posted. It's on page 3 of
Page
that.
3, I see it now. Yeah, I didn't see it before.
Okay.
I just picked up on the conditional support.
Okay. Thanks. Justin?
Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll move from here into the conditional use criteria. So as you know, there are 5 portions. I guess there's a 6, which points to other city ordinances, which will be addressed a little bit later by John and I, mostly by John. So these are the 5 criteria. I'm going to touch on 1, 2, and 5, and then we'll bring in Eddie Duncan from RSG, who did the detailed noise analysis to comment around noise, answer questions there, and then over to Jen Connolly to talk about transportation system. So we were just having some discussion about this. Criteria 1 is around public utilities, facilities, and services. So we've provided letters of service submitted by these Burlington departments. I will note there was a recent addition to the wastewater letter clarifying. There was sort of a qualifying statement in the original letter. So Steve Royce, there's an email from Steve Roy that clarifies that. That does not create any concerns about moving forward from a wastewater standpoint. As Mark mentioned too, with the Burlington Police, we've had in-person meetings or Zoom meeting with Deputy Chief Murad to talk through our operational management plan and questions and concerns he had. Actually, based on that conversation, we did not make any further changes or amendments to the operational management plan. He felt satisfied by that. We also, pre-COVID, had a in-person meeting together with Deputy Chief Murad and South Burlington Chief of Police Sean Burke. So we've certainly taken that public safety aspect seriously. One of the questions we asked Chief of Police Sean Burke very directly was whether he had any concerns in response time. Should there need to be a police response in South Burlington across the line? Because obviously we're on the boundary line. To which he clarified he has patrols in that part of the town at all times, so we wouldn't expect any issue, any difference from Higher Ground's current location if there were a response required from South Burlington Police. And I know it's not necessarily the purview of the Burlington DRB, but we have been having ongoing discussions with Planning Department, Department of Public Works, City Manager, and City Council members from South Burlington as well to ensure we're being thoughtful about overall impacts and not just focusing on City of Burlington. So the character of the area is criteria 2. It is as I talked about earlier, the enterprise light manufacturing zoning district, which allows a variety of industrial and arts uses, and sort of by right and expectation that there will be associated traffic, noise, and odor impacts. This industrial area has been long established, starting in 1958. Actually, the other buildings on our street were constructed in 1960, 1963, 1973, and then continuing with, I think the bus company has been the most recent building addition or building construction, and then some renovations and additions happening as well. And there's currently 24-hour manufacturing operations in the neighborhood, directly across the street from us at Rhino Foods, with deliveries and employees coming and going 5 to 6 days per week, and a history of that happening basically in all buildings of multiple shift operations. The Burlington zoning ordinance accommodates the specific use that we're applying for, up to 15,000 square use, under the conditional use criteria, of course, and that was approved last year pretty convincingly by the City Council with a 10-1 vote. So it's really our full expectation that this use will be consistent with things that are already happening in the ELM district, and many of which are do not require conditional use, but just require basic permit approval. And the impacts are very typical of other uses in the ELM zoning district. Maybe we're forgetting that because much of the rest of the ELM district is being converted to office space in the area north of us. But we've certainly spent a lot of time with the City of Burlington planning team and their desire to maintain industrial buildings within the ELM district as much as possible. In fact, they added additional requirements for the ELM south of Home Ave that we need to maintain 50% of the use of the building for industrial technical uses, which we're doing with this application. So criteria 5 is about renewable energy resources. I guess I'm not planning to spend a lot of time. I think there's a lot of things we have already committed to and will do through this project. Burton is a B Corporation. We have a high commitment to sustainability, as does Higher Ground. We're already making multi-million-dollar investments in the stormwater infrastructure. We have covered bike parking. We'll be increasing that. We have on-site electric vehicle parking. We'll be increasing that. We want to get as many people riding their bikes and walking to the facility as possible. We've had discussions with various local partners about shuttle and bus service. And we will be looking into, we have a solar array on top of the 180 roof. We'll be looking at expanding that onto the 266 roof as well. So lots of things happening from an energy standpoint and sustainability. So from here, I want to introduce Eddie Duncan from RSG. Eddie's the one who put together the report on the noise assessment, and he's got a few pieces he'll highlight from that, and I'm sure answer questions. I guess before we go into that, is there any comments or questions about the criteria that I just covered?
Muted, Brad.
I think we're okay with it, Justin. Keep going.
Okay.
Great. So my name's Eddie Duncan, and I'm a director of acoustics at RSG. I'm a board certified noise control engineer and a member of the Acoustical Society of America. We conducted a noise assessment of this project, and I just wanted to go over some of the highlights of that with you. Don't plan to go into detail unless there are specific questions about some of the details within that assessment, but I think that you all have that assessment available to you to review. I want to quickly orient you to the map here in this slide, and then talk about some of the things that Burton and Higher Ground are planning on doing to manage noise from the proposed facility. If you look at the map here, you can see the concert venue or performing arts space is shown in dark blue. There's an outdoor lounge area that I'll refer to that's in light blue there. There's a lounge for entering through the main entrance that's shown in green. And then there's a bunch of different shapes on top of the building there. Those are rooftop mechanical systems. So I'd like to shift into talking a little bit about what some of the plans are for managing the facility. And there are a number of items, but one of the main improvements or upgrades to the facility is to improve the existing shell of the Performing Arts Center. It's a manufacturing facility, and there's some of it's concrete blocks, some of it's metal siding, and it's commercial roofing. And there are plans, as detailed in the assessment, to increase the sound attenuation of the building shell to prevent or reduce the amount of sound that would be transmitted through the structure. So that's one large component. As part of that, there's also plans to install double sets of doors on the main entrance and also the entrance and egress to the outdoor lounge area. The double sets of doors would act as a sound lock to help prevent sound from escaping out of the facility when people are entering and exiting. And then there are also some operational things that are being done as well, including no tailgating in the parking lot. And when people arrive to the site for a concert or an event, they would be ushered into the lobby and they would queue or wait in the lobby until the doors to the concert venue were opened and they would be allowed to go into there. So they wouldn't be waiting outside.
Are you can accommodate 1,500 people in the in that waiting area?
I think, yeah, that's a good question. Justin, could you speak to that?
No, we actually, I don't know that we have a number, but based on how typical concert goers arrive, there would be a short queue. I don't know, Alex or Mark, if you have comments on that, of how that works and what you would expect for a typical, what would a typical queue look like in terms of people backed up?
This is Alex here. I can jump in a little bit. So the lobby space is large enough to accommodate a fair amount of people. I don't have a specific number right off the top of my head. We use stanchions and create kind of what you'd see in an airline, queue that goes back and forth. And based on what we see historically, people come in waves. So typically doors are an hour before showtime. And so people sort of dribble in over the course of the hour, and very rarely do we end up with a line outside of the queue that would be in the lobby. But if they did, we would have stanchions that were also outside that would queue people up and get them moving through. Our goal is to get people in as quickly as possible.
I would say that operationally, my observation over the last several years of doing this is that typically far less than 10% of the crowd arrives prior to the door time. So this new layout passes my test as far as kind of best case scenario in terms of having room for lines to pre-queue ahead of the door time.
This lobby, if anybody's been to Higher Ground's current venue on Williston Road, this lobby would be significantly larger than what they have available for space in that location.
Okay, keep going, Eddie.
So the noise sources that are considered in the noise assessment are shown here in this map. They include the rooftop mechanical equipment, sound from a concert that would be transmitted through the structure, whatever breaks out sound would occur from the concert facility, but also breakout that would go from the concert facility into the lounge and then out of that space as well. People socializing in the outdoor lounge space, and then lastly, vehicles moving around, entering and exiting the parking lot and moving around the parking lot area. Next slide, please.
Eddie, just if I may jump in
Sure.
back to the with regards to the rooftop equipment, that's the existing rooftop equipment plus proposed rooftop equipment, not only for the Performing Arts Center, but there's also, we've made assumptions for rooftop equipment required for a food court.
That's
it's
correct.
Sort of in response to AJ's earlier question.
Yeah, that's correct. The noise assessment takes into account the existing rooftop mechanical equipment, which is shown in blue or a light blue. And then there's new rooftop HVAC units that are shown over top of the concert facility area there. And then there are hoods and other HVAC equipment that's associated more with the lobby and the food court, the future food court area.
Yep, thank you.
Next slide. So we ran two noise models to look at two different scenarios. But before I discuss those, I just want to briefly orient you to this as well. I know Justin had gone over some of this, but in terms of the character of the area, but you can see the industrial uses and the transportation uses on Quinn City Parkway. To the south, in South Burlington, there's a substation just south of the facility there. And then to the southeast, there is another substation and also a wastewater treatment plant. And then the outer area around all of this is primarily residential. So this map here shows what we refer to in the report as the concert sound level map, or the concert sound level scenario. And what this is modeling or showing is the projected sound levels from the operation or from the proposed facility during a hard rock concert that is attended by, assuming that there's like 500 vehicles accessing the site. And so the sources that are included in this model run are all of the rooftop mechanical equipment that were shown on the previous slide, the breakout noise or the sound that's being transmitted out of the structure from the concert venue and the adjacent spaces, people socializing in the outdoor lounge area, and then also some vehicles that are accessing the lot, assuming there are potential latecomers to the concert or something like that. So there is some vehicle movements in this model as well. And based on that, you can see here that the highest modeled sound level of all of that going on is 42 decibels at Arthur Court. This is the average over the course of an hour, but it also is assuming that the concert music is occurring for the entire hour, so there aren't breaks between songs or sets. And it also assumes that the HVAC equipment is running for the entire hour. The colored lines that are shown in this map, if you're interested in sound levels outside of Arthur Court, represent different sound levels throughout the area. Those are sound level ISO lines. And so I think the yellow line is fairly prominent there. And if you look at the yellow line, that's the 40 decibel contour. So anything outside of that yellow line is less than 40, and anything inside that yellow line is greater than 40. So if we look down into South Burlington along Maple Ave, the sound levels for this scenario are around 35 decibels. And if we go over to the west to the Redstone condominium area, you're between generally 30 and 35 decibels. And then over beyond Arthur Court to the east, the sound levels are generally between 35 and 40 decibels over in that area.
And can you put I know it's in the report somewhere, put that in context of what 35 or 45 decibels is in terms of normal noise in a city?
Yeah, so we'll talk about in 2 slides. We'll talk about background sound levels in the area, but normal conversational speech occurs at 55 decibels. So 35 is 20 decibels less than that. So it would be essentially 4 times as quiet as conversational speech, or 4 times quieter than conversational speech. Next slide, Justin. So the second scenario that we looked at was an end of concert scenario. So in this model, there is no music playing. There's no outdoor lounge use occurring, but rather all the HVAC equipment is still operating. All the rooftop mechanical equipment still operating, and we have 500 vehicles that would be moving in the parking lot and then exiting the site. And in this scenario, the highest sound level is 44 decibels, and that occurs at Arthur Court again. And you can see, compared to the previous map, sound levels are slightly higher under this scenario, and that's due primarily to the vehicles accessing, moving in the parking lot and then exiting the site. And I think that speaks to the music and the concert in the previous slide, in that the sound from the music is generally less than this scenario that involves the vehicles leaving. So that's just, I think, a good comparison, or a good thing to keep in the back of your mind there when we're talking about the different types of sources that occur from this facility. Next slide. So this is the last slide for noise, and just wanted to kind of bring it into context, a greater context here. The city of Burlington has a noise ordinance, and that noise ordinance is not quantitative, but qualitative, and it speaks to having noise be not unreasonable or endangering the peace and quiet, or causing a public nuisance. And these are all things that are fairly common in a noise ordinance, and also are paralleled by some quantified limits as well in community noise guidelines. And so we provide some of those in the report, and on this slide as well, where we have the World Health Organization tying specific sound levels to specific impacts. And so, for example, 55 and 50 decibels protect against serious annoyance and moderate annoyance, and that's an average over the course of the daytime. At night, the World Health Organization recommends 45 decibels or less to protect against sleep disturbance, and that's average over the course of the night. And there's also a maximum sound level tied to that that's not shown on this, but they recommend that the maximum sound level not exceed 60 at night to protect against sleep disturbance. And then there's also an ANSI standard, which is the American National Standards Institute, that speaks to land use compatibility and whether or not sound from one land use is compatible with other land uses. And so this here shows that the sound level of 55 decibels is considered compatible with urban suburban areas, and 60 marginally compatible with urban suburban areas. There's a little nuance here with the metric that's being used in that standard. That's an average over the course of the day with a penalty applied tonight, but I think it still speaks to the projected sound levels being well below those sound level limits or guidelines. And then lastly, it's certainly worth comparing this to existing sound levels in the area. And so average sound levels during the day in this area are generally between 47 and 50, so the upper 40s to low 50s during the day. And that's primarily due to traffic noise and mechanical equipment in the area. And at night, the average sound levels are generally between 40 and 45 decibels. And again, that's also due to primarily to traffic noise and mechanical equipment in the area, mechanical and electrical equipment in the area. So, we can look at the projected sound levels and see that they generally fit within those existing background sound levels. They're generally less than the daytime sound levels and within the range of the typical average nighttime sound levels in the area.
So Andy, have you gone through? I have a couple of questions for you if you've wrapped up your presentation.
Yeah, that's all I have for presenting, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Sure, I have a couple from my notes and from some of the things that were submitted. So there's an outdoor patio here. What did you model as noise generated from that patio? It looks like it's just voices. Is that correct?
It's elevated voices, people socializing in the outdoor patio.
No amplified music or band playing out there at all, right?
That's correct.
And well, I've done this before in a couple of other projects. Doors open, doors closed. I'm assuming the doors to the concert venue will be closed at all times. This is always an issue for wedding venues, which I think you're aware of. Are they closing the doors to the barn or are they keeping them open? What do you have in your?
Yeah, the doors are closed and there are a double set of doors so that when one set of doors opens, there's still a closed set of doors before you exit.
Okay, and you model them with closed. In modeling the after concert venue, I'm very familiar with the area. I live around the corner. One of the little houses that you marked is mine. So, this is proposed to go till 1 or 2 a.m. at sometimes. And I think one of the concerns that the neighbors have, and I think it's very well founded, is you've got 1,000 people exiting a facility at 1 in the morning after consuming a few. They slam doors, they holler at their friends, honk, those kinds of things. Have you modeled any of that instantaneous noise?
We have not modeled people in the parking lot after the facility, although I do know that it's part of the operations plan to usher those people out of the facility and to their parking area.
Yeah, but that means they're in the parking area and everything goes well until it doesn't go well. And did you model any car horns, door slamming in the parking lot at night?
No, we did not model that.
And I've heard a lot about this, and I've dealt with this, I think even with you before. The difference between L-max, LEQ, and some of the other standards. One of the applicants, I think, has pointed out that there's some not the applicant, the CRZ has pointed out there's some case law out there that says L-max is a standard that should be used in some cases. One, can you explain the difference to us between those two things? Whether you applied L-max or could apply it?
Yeah, so the case law you're referring to is Lathrop, and that is an Act 250 case that says that L-max is an appropriate metric to be considered, along with LEQ, particularly for looking at whether or not a sound is considered shocking and offensive under Act 250 standards. So we know what the L-max limit, we know what L-max sound levels are like from facilities like these, but in evaluating the Burlington ordinance and regularly applied community noise guidelines, LEQ is a good metric to apply to those things because that's what the World Health Organization is speaking to, ANSI guidelines are speaking to. It's an appropriate metric to evaluate sources from a facility like this, particularly when the vast majority of the sources for this facility are fairly constant or consistent sources. You have HVAC equipment. We also modeled the concert as not stopping. So we didn't modeled downtimes in terms of looking at these LEQs. We considered that a consistent source as well.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Any other questions on the, I guess that is a concern that I guess we will talk about it more is terms the traffic and the post-concert experience of 1,000 people out in the parking lot with their cars. There's really no evaluation of that at the moment. Is that true?
Yeah, well, we have the cars leaving and moving. The sound level from cars moving around is generally higher than someone talking in the parking lot. And I know we like to characterize car doors as slamming, but in reality, most car doors are not a matter of a slamming noise. No. I think there are movements that would occur with people and with cars. But really, in terms of noise impacts and the stronger noise that emissions that would occur at the site, it's engines from cars, and that has been evaluated in this assessment.
This is Brian Dunkill. I would just point out that Eddie's report is an effort to talk to the standard that's included in the zoning ordinance. Looking at criterion 3 for conditional use, the standard that you're applying by ordinance is asking whether or not the project will have nuisance impacts from noise greater than typically generated by other permitted uses in the same zoning area. And so that's the standard that you need to apply. And we asked Eddie to develop his study to figure out how to test for that standard.
Thank you. Okay. Justin, are you up next?
I am very brief. Is that it for noise? We can move on to traffic
The moment
now.
Oh.
Okay. So Jen Connolly is going to jump in here. So Jen from VHB is the one who put together the traffic studies that you've all received.
Good evening. I'm Jen Conley. I am the Director of Transportation Systems with VHB in South Burlington office. We prepared a traffic impact study for this project that followed industry standards and was based on working with Burlington DPW to work out what the scope of the project would be. The next slide will show you kind of the intersections, the study area that we looked at. As shown, it's a thorough study area that really follows people, vehicles on their trip in and out of the site. I apologize if you hear my dog barking in the background. Basically, we were provided the study area and asked to look at a few things. The standard steps of a traffic study include assessing the existing conditions, looking at future conditions, and then determining the project impacts. In this case, the future conditions are a little more complicated because they include whether the Champlain Parkway is in place or not. And so we were asked to evaluate with and without the Champlain Parkway. We took a look at what the anticipated number of trips that would be generated from the project would be. We based that on industry standards as well as on what is expected for the higher ground facility. That was based on information as far as what the peak number of attendance is anticipated to be. To be very conservative, we assumed that even though show opening hours tend to be much later, that we assumed 30% of those trips were overlapping with the PM peak hour, so that we really wanted to give a worst case scenario. What is happening at the Burton site with the other uses, as well as what's happening at the Performing Arts Center, overlapping with each other. And we'll get into that a little bit further. Then we took a look at what the operations of these area intersections are. They've been studied a number of times, again, with the Champlain Parkway project. And really, the delay increases at most locations were found to be minimal. The exception to that, which was identified in the comments from the peer reviewer as well as from DPW, were intersections along Home Avenue. After the peer review consultant reviewed the analysis and some of the recommendations that are made were some ongoing monitoring at those locations and some potentially improving if some of those negative operations were expected to happen over time. So I know that you've been provided with some of those conditions. We also understand the staff's concern about peak hours. Now, again, we analyzed a condition where not only were the other uses at Burton in place, but also the Performing Arts Center, but they've made a request that we specifically try to avoid having the Performing Arts Center traffic overlap with the peak period, which we do understand. What we would suggest is that on weekdays, on non-holiday weekdays, that there be that limitation that the events start at 6:30 or later as was requested. What we would say is that there are smaller events that are currently held on site or that could be held in the Performing Arts Center that could be held on those weekdays, events of up to 300 people, as long as those events do not end so that it dumps people out during that peak period. And we certainly would be agreeable to a condition to that effect, so that some smaller events can still be held on the site as long as we're avoiding those peak hours of traffic that Burlington DPW is concerned with, and rightly so. The other issue is the remaining items kind of identified on the next slide have to do with kind of the operational situation. We do understand, and I apologize, this is a little hard to read, but we are working with South Burlington to really determine what the appropriate signage is to prevent vehicles from either attempting to go down into the neighborhood to park, or either before an event or after an event, whether it is permanent signage or also you'll see in the operational management plan some temporary signage for those major events to really try to discourage that travel up and down those side streets. Another issue that was raised that is an important one is that the one-way bridge in a late evening hours might not be where you would want a bicyclist traveling. And so one of the things that was also identified for us and that we have included is that staff will be aware of that. And as bicyclists are leaving the facility, they'll be encouraged to head to the north on Queen City Park instead of heading in that direction, just to avoid a situation at night on the narrow bridge. And otherwise, it's just having the additional staff to encourage and to monitor as people are leaving and manage the traffic situation. And I think that pretty much summarizes kind of the traffic, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And I got confused by access to the site. How many places are people accessing the property? Because there's 3 different entrances, aren't there?
There are, and I believe the parking management plan has been or is being prepared by others. How that will fill you, I'm sure your concern is more on a peak night, how the parking, it fills and unfills. Is that the question?
Yeah, just that's the whole, one of the things that have been talked about is controlling traffic, controlling egress and ingress from the site, and to know which ways are people coming in. So maybe somebody could go through that.
Yeah, I can comment on that. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, part of our expectation and plan for this is that parking, particularly for large events, would access our surface parking on both our properties, 180 and 266. So there's actually 5 driveways that would be used for vehicles to get in and out. There are 3 associated with a 180 property and 2 associated with a 266 property. Sort of the principal entrance in this plan that you're looking at for the 266 building will be the driveway directly to the west of the 266, or down in this graphic as we're looking at it. But certainly from an egress standpoint, people will be using the closest exit. So we expect that some cars will exit to the south, some to the north, and use the driveways that are easiest access to get out of, at least in the That's our expectation in the existing conditions of the street. With a Champlain Parkway, we expect a significantly higher percentage will exit to the north end and leave the site on the parkway.
Via Industrial Avenue, is that the way they would get there?
There is no Industrial Avenue. It would be
the
parkway is you go to the north on Queen City Park Road, bang a right, basically on a little tiny piece of Austin Drive. It crosses the tracks and becomes Home Avenue, and then turn either north or south onto the parkway.
Yes, I'm looking at still labels it as Industrial Parkway. Okay.
Brad, I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
It's for Jennifer. So one of the areas that I think that I'm concerned about is one of the unsignalized intersections is at Home and Pine.
Yes.
If I look at the traffic report, it looks like the project in the evening, without the Champlain Parkway, which I don't know when that's coming, if ever. I'm a little confused in looking at it in that, okay, all right. Which one is the eastbound and which one is the westbound movement?
Let me open that up. I apologize.
It looks like with Burton, the westbound movement goes to LOSF. Do you have an average intersection level of service with the Burton project and no Champlain Parkway at that intersection?
Well, what typically happens at an unsignalized intersection is you measure your level of service or your delay based on your stop controlled approaches. And so what ends up happening is the analysis looks at how much delay each person as they pull up is going to experience, whether it's their fault or whether it's that there's too much heavy traffic conflicting with them, or whether they've just pulled up to the back of a long queue. And so for an unsignalized intersection, we don't tend to do kind of an average overall intersection delay.
Okay.
You tend to measure it by stop controlled approach. But your point is true. There is definitely a lot of delay there that is expected to be mitigated by the presence of the Champlain Parkway. And I think that is why when we looked at the projections, and it is a 2028 condition, and it's based on the Champlain Parkway volumes, with and without from their traffic study. There certainly is a lot of congestion, and the problem is once you're in a level of service F condition, as you add one more car, it goes up exponentially. It's really an exponential curve how the delay increases. So it is one of those things that it is a tough situation at this point to mitigate, knowing the Champlain Parkway is coming in, and I think that is why the recommendation from DPW was to observe it and to mitigate if there is a problem and if the Champlain Parkway isn't forthcoming the way we all hope it is coming.
So one of the concerns is, and we've gotten into this in a few other places, is I don't understand how we can approve something with the future if there's a problem, then mitigate without understanding what the mitigation is and what constitutes a problem. That's caused problems in other cases, and I think there's some case law suggesting that's not necessarily the best idea. What mitigation has been discussed? Because I look at the data and I'm like, well, that doesn't seem very good. 341 seconds of delay southbound from Pine Street. I don't think the modeling's correct. I really don't think there's that kind of level of service in the PM peak, but let's say there is. What mitigation is available? What mitigation is out there?
Well, the most typical mitigation that is considered at an unsignalized intersection is signalizing. I mean, that is the most typical. I mean, there's the ability to either add lanes where you can, but sometimes that impacts your delay in a negative way, or it is the signalization of an intersection.
And when I see the PM numbers, that's the PM peak. Is that correct? That's not like 1 in the morning when the traffic comes out of the concert.
No, not at all. That is during the PM peak hour, which again was a modeling of 1/3 of the traffic associated with the concert venue and arriving on top of what was happening at the Burton. So that's really a weekday commuter peak hour that is kind of overstated as far as project impact.
Did you model, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, the concert just let out, all the cars are leaving at once. Did you model that, what that looks like?
We didn't at Home Avenue. We did take a look at that. The peer review consultant hired by the city did ask us to take a look at how the one-way, the single lane bridge, excuse me, would operate at the concert ending hour. So we did collect some traffic data over there, and we did take a look at that hour, and the volumes were still less than what was observed during the weekday commuter with the overlapping volumes. But I did not look at it specifically over at Home Avenue. That certainly is something, you know, that we could take a look at. The challenge with that is that traffic isn't right now what it usually is. And so it would be tough to establish that, you know, kind of 11 p.m. baseline.
But traffic at 1 a.m. there currently is 0. So, and it's generally 0.
Right. So then in that case, really the delays would be minimal because anyone who pulled up to the intersection would pass right through.
Well, it is a stop controlled intersection. So one of the things I'm concerned about is queuing there and what that results in. You know, there's some neighbors that live right there, and I think they've expressed previously concerns about, you know, hey, it's time to go, honk, you know, whatnot. So we may ask that you look at that.
Okay.
This is Brian Dunkill again. AJ, the post-project monitoring permit conditions is something that was reviewed by the Vermont Supreme Court in the Champlain Parkway appeals and was affirmed by the court. And
it's an Act 250 though, right?
Correct. But the notion of that is something that has been used. So I just wanted to point that out.
No, you're right. That's Walsh's Act 250. That's a good one.
Correct.
You have more on traffic, AJ?
No, those are the questions I had. Oh, I do have one more question. Sorry. If I look at the trip generation, sorry, this is just being particular because I know we're going to have questions about it. Does the trip generation include people who are getting dropped off by cabs or Ubers or whatnot?
It does, in that those trips are already built in when you take a look at either the industry standards by ITE or what we assumed for vehicle occupancy on you know, the higher ground portion of the site. So yes, all trips, regardless of what type they are included in that.
Okay.
And I take it, Justin, that parking is yet to come?
Yeah, John, we've actually just today submitted a parking management plan. So John can touch base on that and we can take questions on that in a few moments here.
Okay.
Do we want to move on or are there more?
No, I think moving on is good.
Looks like Keenan may have his hand up.
Keenan, thank you.
Yeah.
No problem. I'm trying to figure out how best to interject this in. So if this is going to get addressed at a different point, feel free to sort of move the presentation along. But there is sort of this, a lot of these issues are sort of interconnected in that we're sort of, and your operational plan addresses some of this, but we're dealing with sort of what happens when people are both getting in and going out. And one of the questions I had is it's specifically around sort of tailgating. It's going to be prohibited. And then there's also this issue of potentially parking in the neighborhoods and sort of in the Red Rocks parking area. And I'm just wondering if you can kind of speak to, I see that it's not that no tailgating is permitted, but how are you going to enforce that and keep folks from doing that, you know, if they're sort of off in the sidelines doing that?
Through staff. So staff will be circulating regularly before events to monitor that in terms of no tailgating. I see Mark shaking his head. So, I don't know, Mark, if you want to comment on that. I think I don't know how much that's similar or different from other operations.
Yeah, the concert starts much earlier in the day than folks who arrive to it realize. We have staff there starting usually in the morning, dealing with load-ins and stuff and monitoring sort of arrivals. So that's something we've dealt with in South Burlington. And as soon as anybody is noted to have arrived, we send a team to enforce the no tailgating policy. We have a different version of that in South Burlington, but what's proposed here is a strict no tailgating policy, and that would be monitored ideally via closed circuit security cameras from somebody sitting at a desk inside the building, and then a security guard essentially is dispatched to go send those folks somewhere else as soon as there's any of that issue identified.
Maybe it would be helpful, Mark, if you wouldn't, or Alex, if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple moments to talk to, on page 2 of the operational management plan, there's a table, and that table explains your crowd management methodology and protocols, and how you have folks that float with concentric circles outside of within and then outside the venue as the crowd moves. And I think that might be helpful for the board to just hear what actually these words mean as a practical matter.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that. It's sort of relies on pinch points. So obviously it seems sort of unmanageable to imagine 1,000 people walking through. I don't have it directly in front of me, but I did write it at one point, or draft it at one point. So I can just speak to the sort of the spirit of it. And it's that you use these concentric circles and you use the pinch points that the lobby creates to make sure that you have multiple looks at every patron. Ideally you have 10 plus sets of eyeballs on each patron as they exit. And that's how we operate in South Burlington, but it's because of the incredibly stringent regulation by the Vermont Department of Liquor and Lottery Division of Liquor Control on us. We apply these pinch points frequently so that we have essentially maximum eyeballs on folks as they exit. And this concentric circles system is essentially, you put, a lot of times people don't even realize that we're doing it, but there's a ring of staff, sometimes handing out flyers, sometimes saying, thanks folks, have a good night. And they're attempting to have verbal interactions with as many guests as they can and assess non-verbally signs of physical intoxication with each ring. And so there's essentially a 3-ringed system at our maximum capacity that's laid out in this operational management plan. And I'm confident. I mean, this is above what we've been doing in South Burlington, and it's top notch. I mean, we're the gold standard of liquor liability enforcement in the state of Vermont. We have a lot of experience, and honestly, a lot of these concerts will be much smaller than 1,000 people or 1,500 people. Excuse me. So yeah, I stand by this system, but what Brian's asking me to speak to is this concentric circles thing. So essentially you make sure that we have staff eyes at several stages of the egress process. That's how we identify problem folks. Usually we know who they are before the egress process starts through monitoring of the concert as it's taking place. It's relatively easy, especially with security cameras as getting as good as they are, to find folks, even in a crowd of 800 plus folks, that are going to be an issue to us later. And we try to weed out bad apples as soon as we can in order to ensure sort of operational smoothness throughout the night. So that's our goal. We don't want anybody ruining somebody else's good time. And we certainly don't want any issues for our community. So that's why we do this concentric circles approach.
And just so there's no ambiguity about it, for large events, you would have staff outside in the parking lot, correct?
Correct. So it's one ring is inside the venue, one ring is where the the doors, external doors meet the outside, and then you have a ring in the parking lot as well. And we've sort of applied that. We've practiced that. Our existing security guards, who would be the same people applying this at Burton, have done this exact thing in South Burlington every time. The second ring, as it currently stands, sits on the outside edge of the fire lane. So as somebody steps off the patio out towards their car, we're having a last look to assess visible intoxication, ideally having a verbal conversation to assess a patron's or a guest rather's level of intoxication, and then also just to make sure that people did have fun at the concert and that they're going to get home safely. So we added a third tier for this, and sometimes on even larger shows, 3,000 to 5,000, we do even more of this. So this is a tried and true industry standard approach that I'm sort of the resident expert on concert operations here on this thing, and I can put my stamp on this is the best way to do this according to industry literature and also according to lived experience.
And then just if I could just add one last point, sorry, Brad, is the way we approach, the way Burton and Higher Ground approach this application and looking at the conditional use criteria is we looked at the ability to model through standard accepted methods, noise and traffic, but then recognized and heard loudly through all the process that Justin talked about that occurred with neighbors and others, that there's these other things that are difficult to capture by model. And that's why the operational management plan is in place and part of this application. It's to make it so that those issues that may be difficult to monitor in a standard accepted way are captured through the way the project will be managed and tamped down so that those issues don't become a level of a nuisance that is unacceptable under the criteria.
One other comment I'd just like to draw some attention to in the operational management plan is there's just one line that talks about pre-event planning with the police. And it's one of the pieces that I learned very clearly in conversations with South Burlington Chief of Police Burke and Deputy Chief of Police Murad that there are very few events during the year when this is required because of the types of acts that play at Higher Ground, but there are a handful. And there's a very strong track record of pre-event planning and coordination between Higher Ground and the police department. And in fact, that was a specific point of interest for Deputy Chief Murad asking if that was included and talking to Chief Burke about it. So that's an area that's certainly attractive to us, is that we're relying on that, not just reaction, but also getting out in front and anticipating and making sure if there's plans to be put in place to coordinate during the event, that those are all really well thought out.
Justin, I think you still have more in your presentation that you want to do, which is parking and just a note of what you're left on your presentation. I'm thinking about it, public comment. We said we wanted to go until 7:30, and we're fast approaching that. And I know we're going to be going to another hearing and have most of the public comments happening then, but it might be good to have some tonight. And so
I can be pretty brief, Brad.
We can take 5 minutes or less to just wrap up here. So the thing, John and I will sort of tag team. We've just got a few slides here of, John, you want to jump in here on response?
Sure. Try as we might to prepare and submit a thorough application. There's always going to be a few details that where we just didn't have enough information for Scott to make a conclusive recommendation to the DRB. So in his staff comments, there were 6 of those points. One was just the hours of operation, which I think Jen has responded to. Scott also pointed out just some discrepancies between the site plan and an earlier site plan that was associated with the stormwater improvements. So we responded with information that clarified all those items. Same thing with the outdoor lighting, the need for a parking management plan that would speak to park sharing of spaces. On that point, as the board is well aware, parking requirements are cumulative, and what we have here is a shared use, a perfect opportunity for shared use, where the use is going to occur at night when 426 parking spaces are going to be empty. So we just needed to respond to that in a manner that allowed Scott as staff member and you as the board to review that and make an affirmative finding. So we've done that, and that also includes, Scott had made a comment about bicycle parking, and that's part of our parking management plan. In addition, there was a letter that was submitted from, I don't know if anybody has any questions on that.
I'd rather do that next time. So
okay, great. So maybe the next one. Next slide is the CRZ letter and major impact standards. That was something that was brought up. Scott had responded to that in his staff comments. Public safety service, we do have in the submission a letter from Chief Murad offering unconditional support. Noise and vibration, as many of us has pointed out here, that the noise impacts are similar to and typical of uses in this zone. Transportation system, the impacts are typical of traffic impacts for this type of use in this part of the city. And then finally, wastewater. The letter that we received last November from Steve Roy, city engineer, contained some boilerplate language that was really addressed to the craft breweries of the world and what the impact might be there. I contacted him late last week, and he followed up with an email clarifying that, saying that this particular use, there is no problem all with the city providing water and wastewater to the site. And then finally, there's a letter. Justin, why don't you jump in on this one?
Yeah, so, and Keenan, you asked about signage in front of Red Rocks Park. That was part of this discussion. A team of us met with a group from the city of South Burlington on June 30th. That included City Manager Kevin Dorn, Director of Planning Paul Connor, Helen Reilly, and David Kaufman. We've also spoken with Tom Chittenden and Tim Barrett separately. And the letter that you received was actually already done when we had that conversation with them, and they told us about that, and they have not followed up. We did have very clear discussion about these 5 points here. The city council members, and specifically Council Chair, really took responsibility to follow up on options for signage on Central Avenue and in front of Red Rocks Park that would discourage or prohibit parking for events there. We discussed multiple ideas, and she took that forward. We reiterated our commitment around no tailgating. We reiterated our commitment to our operational management plan that does include directing traffic with a person for large events and like a stanchion or bollard away from Central Ave and Red Rocks Park post-event. We've committed to following through on a monitoring plan for the one-way bridge and move forward if further controls are necessary there. And then the final point is they'd like some assurance that any of the soundproofing installation attenuation, which Eddie described, ensure that it meets the performance standard. So we would be holding our vendors accountable to that. So the actual noise is consistent with what Eddie presented in his findings. So that's that. I'll just end with, I can't talk about Burton without talking about our founder, Jake Burton Carpenter. It was a big bummer, huge bummer. We lost Jake last November, and certainly wasn't our intention when we started this project, but we actually think it's going to be another way to really recognize and celebrate Jake's impact on our community and on the world, and really bringing together all these things that really were special to him, snowboarding obviously, but also he's a huge music fan, and just bringing a place for our community to gather together. And I know there's concerns and questions and issues, but we're more so excited about creating this really special place here that we think our entire community be really proud of enjoying. And with that, I think we're done.
Very thorough presentation. I appreciate it. And it's only because we're a little tight for time. I think we would have some questions more on these things, but I'd like to be able to have a few public comments before we end tonight's session. Scott, I'm going to put pressure on you to, because I know there's members of the public who would like to speak. And I'm seeing a few hands coming up. And as I noted before, we would limit time to 3 minutes a person. And the other thing which we always say is that people repeating the same thing over and over again is really not particularly helpful. We do hear what people say, we read the submissions, and as AJ mentioned at the beginning, it's really helpful to have the written comments because we do look at those. But saying that, Scott, I think we have time for maybe 3 or 4 people to speak right now.
So Brad, so the CRZ group is a group and had a presentation. Do we want to stick with that as public comment tonight?
Yeah. No, okay. If they have a presentation tonight, we could start with that as a public comment. And who is that?
Okay, so I need to promote a couple folks to presenters and let a few others be able to speak. So I'll just take a moment.
And what we said, as a group, we were going to say if they're making a public comment, trying to keep that to 5 minutes right now.
So we have Lori Smith, and I'm looking for Sharon O'Neill.
So can I speak to process?
I'm going to ask that people who speak to swear themselves in, actually, just as a formality. I see Lori Smith, and I don't know who else is. Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
In a penalty of perjury. And on this, given the time elements, if you want to start speaking, go right ahead.
When I've been emailing with Scott about this, we as the CRZ have a presentation to make that is probably similar, though not as long as Burton's, that is speaking to the technical aspects of this application. And we would like to have a time to be able to make that presentation to the board to present to you the information that we have from noise and traffic experts and about safety that is pertinent to the permitting of this application. Scott said that we'd be able to be panelists and that we could have, because we have 15 people on our group, that we could have a reasonable chunk of time. I'm suggesting that maybe we postpone that to the beginning of the next meeting.
I think that's probably a good idea.
Yes.
I think that's a good idea. And we could discuss. AJ?
Might it make sense to pause now and start and continue the next meeting to start with public comment?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
And will we be able to make a presentation in a similar fashion to the one that Burton made?
I'm assuming it's not a 2-hour presentation.
It is not a 2-hour presentation. We've done everything we can to whittle it down, but we do want to make sure that the salient points are properly illuminated for you guys.
Okay.
Understood. We want to give everyone a chance to comment on it. We know it affects a lot of people.
And is that something you can make a preliminary submittal to the board in advance so we can actually see the material? It'd be helpful for us before you make your presentation.
We can do that. I will. Do we know when this next hearing will be?
Scott?
The board would need to act on that, but I've got it penciled in for August 4th.
Okay, so we can certainly give you the outline of our presentation by then. I mean, well before then.
Okay. Then, unless any board members objecting to this approach here, we will pause, adjourn.
Brad, let me make a motion. I move that we continue this hearing until the August 4th date.
Do we have a second? Keenan?
Seconded.
Any discussion? Do this by vote. All in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. So we will continue this and we'll start with the presentation by CRZ at the next meeting.
And be clear that if anyone for some reason can't be there, submit written comments. We will take them in.
Yes.
That's a
I
good
want to
point.
thank you guys very much, and I look forward to being able to chat with you in August.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is our last agenda item tonight. I guess we'll adjourn the meeting. How do people feel about deliberating on the two items that we have? Oh, it's late. I guess we have two items. Well, three, because we put Elmwood on. So we got Elmwood, Apple Tree Point, and North Avenue. How do people feel about that tonight?
I mean, I think we can do those fairly quickly.
Okay. Jeff wasn't recused on all of them. Which one was he not recused on? Scott, do you know, remember?
Jeff participated in the first one, and then my connection died on the second one. I don't know if he was engaged in that or not.
He's only participated in one.
So I'd like Jeff's comments. He had a lot of thoughts on the Sarah Holbrook Center, so maybe we don't deliberate on that. We
Well, he
deliberate.
was going to get back on the phone. If we can call Jeff on
Why
the
don't
phone.
we just call him and deliberate on
that's
whichever